You, Hugo.
Yeah, nice to meet you, Sofiane. I think we could have done that in French, but let's stick to English for today.
Well,
Um,
I'll say it in French. Enchanté, Hugo. Enchanté, Sofiane.
Enchanté.
Wow.
So, everyone, welcome to Crypto Fashion Week 2022. I'm your host, Lady PheOnix. I am joined by Hugo from Luxo and Sofiane from every brilliant idea that's on the world right now, but you might know him first through Newcoin and Newlife. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Hugo, give us a little bit of background about yourself, about Luxo, and how you got started in the Web3 economy.
Yeah, sure. So I worked. So I studied computer science, and I work as a software engineer, mainly Web 2. But I was very interested by Web 3 and doing like those research aside from my work, let's say. And one day I came across Fabian and Luxo, and I sent him a Telegram message, say, "Hey, that's cool. Will you hire someday, maybe?" And yeah, that's how it started. And then I joined Luxo almost 2 years ago. And my first mission was actually to work on DMAT, because back then DMAT was not existing really. It was a really nice challenge, and it was also a good opportunity to bridge what we were doing at Luxo and make it available to more like consumer base. So it was a really interesting project. So I worked on DMAT for like 8 months something before switching back to Luxo. So I'm still helping on the technical questions, but yeah, there's give lots of insights from the partners, the brands, what they want to do, what they expect to do. And yeah, there was I think when we bridge the fashion world and the technological world, it's really, this is where the good idea comes. So yeah, that's what I'm doing at the moment. Yeah.
Wonderful. Sofiane, give us a bit of background on Newlife and Newcoin and tell us how you got started in the Web3 economy.
Sure. Yeah, it's actually funny that you mentioned culture and technology, because those are the two areas where I spent my life. So I started in the early 2000 with Web 1.0, working on ringtone startup, and then in the entertainment content, then for 10 years, 15 years in fashion, with a Web 2 platform where we were selling advertising to top tier brands. And during that phase, I had this like epiphany where I saw that the future was not advertising, but it was more the digitalization or tokenization, as we say today, of intellectual property. And so I dropped publishing and social media activities in 2015 to dedicate to the Newlife app, which is a social network for trendsetters based on a data protocol for reaching consensus on creative value. So it's like social consensus on creative value. That's what I'm working on.
Amazing. This conversation today, if you're just joining us, will be about Platforms 3.0. How should platform founders, those working at kind of these new consciousness platforms, new business model platforms, new social agreement platforms, be thinking about their role in the metaverse? So that's what we're discussing today. Sofiane, thank you for joining us. Thank you for giving us background on how you got started in Web3. And Hugo, thank you for joining us from Luxo, all the way from Germany, right, Hugo?
Yeah, from Berlin. Yeah.
Right on, right on, right on. And Sofiane, where are you broadcasting from?
Currently in Prague. That's where half of the team is based.
Excellent. And so, Sofiane, let's start with like the issues that you see. Usually entrepreneurs get started with their own venture, their own business, because they're trying to solve some sort of problem, either one that's personal to them or one that's personal to some friends of theirs. So what was the problem that was personal to you, and why you chose Web3 as a solution for that problem?
So yeah, basically the meta or the very philosophical problem is the challenge of the reconciliation of realities. So we all have our own experience, our own reality, and if you look at the fashion, but also the tech space, it's about people coming together and trying to reach consensus about what's creative, what's valuable creatively. So things like AI, machine learning, metaverse, all those terms are made up by humans. They are not the truth, quote unquote. They are more a meaning that we try to produce together. And so the problem when you have millions, sometimes even billions of people trying to produce meaning together, is that it creates a huge incentive for the organizer of this conversation to take advantage of it, of their position, either through forced consensus, things like let's remove everything that I dislike, so you kind of censorship. It can be influenced consensus through advertising and manipulation of the algorithm and so on. And all the let's say the degrees of granularity, let's say, between all those approaches to like distort the more organic consensus. And so I looked at AI and I worked on AI for a very long time to try to solve that problem through mechanism design. But there is always a way for people to try to game AIs. It's a never-ending story. That's what we see with Google, for example, SEO and social media optimization and so on. So if you really want to have like integrity in the process that defines consensus on value, you have to have a scarcity. You have to have things like censorship resistance, Byzantine fault tolerance, decentralization, all those aspects. And so that's how I got into crypto to solve those problems.
Thank you, Sofiane. Hugo, same question. What problem is Luxo trying to solve, and what role do you play at Luxo to help them in solving that problem in the Web3 context?
Yeah, so to give some context, so Luxo was founded by Marjorie Hernandez and Fabian Vogelsteller, and Fabian was at the early days of Ethereum, and back then he created lots of tools that developers are still using today. So I'm thinking about Web3.js, and he also worked on standardization of smart contracts. And one standard that's very famous is the ERC20, so the one for the token standard. And he was very early and saw the importance of having those standards, because having standard allows us to make the app, let's say, they can communicate between each other. So if you have a token on platform A, you can also see it on platform C or from the wallet D and so on. So Fabian wanted to put this to, let's say, to the next level. And one big thing we are working on is identity. So how can you interact on the blockchain through an identity, which we call a universal profile, instead of a simple account? Account being a ledger address or a MetaMask address. So the technical term is EOA, external owned account. So how can we standardize this identity? So when a brand or an individual issues something or interact on the blockchain, we have a strong identity and not just random accounts. So that's one thing. And another thing we are working on is things related to NFTs. Today, how it works, it's mainly based on ERC 721 or ERC 1155. So those are the standards for non-fungible tokens. And it's cool. It's super cool, but there's a couple of flaws in the system. So one of them is how the metadata are stored. Also, there is no real identity in those standards. So we are working on proposing standards for NFTs. So one example is, let's say, how do you keep track of your tokens? Today, if you want to know which token an address has, you need to scan the entire blockchain, and you need to go through each smart contract and do like balance off, balance off, balance off. And from that, you can get somehow what an address has. We are making smart contracts and standard to allow us to have a smoother experience with that, and to allow people to maybe reject a token or accept a token. So yeah, this is what we're working on. And personally, I'm working also on open source packages, which will allow developers to use those standards like in an easy way. So this is super cool to work with developers and provide documentation and tools. So this is what we're doing. I can get more into details, but yeah, I think it's a good start. Yeah. I don't know if you're muted. I'm not sure if.
Yeah, maybe
Okay.
Lady PheOnix gave us the mic for the rest of the
Okay, cool. So I had a question. So I checked your docs, and it looks like we're working on similar things. How do you address like standard? How do you make it compatible with like different blockchains? Will you provide the smart contracts or like the implementation for different blockchain? How can you maybe explain
Yeah,
that quickly?
so it's interesting that you mentioned standardization, because we work on something, let's say, at an other more higher level of standardization, which is design. Design for experience for users. So if you look at the landscape today of blockchain, you have lots of layer ones, and then you have lots of dApps. And each dApp has a unique set of smart contracts and a unique tokenomic model and a fragmented liquidity. So it means that if I go to dApp 1 in blockchain A, let's say, I'm in 1A, I cannot interact with people on B25, for example. So we are trying to solve that problem. A lot has happened organically in the last 2 years, meaning that you have things like NFT storefronts, DeFi protocols, and so on that have become adopted. And so it's easy for users to jump from like one DeFi protocol to the next, because most of them are copy paste in terms of smart contracts, in terms of backend, front end, and so on. So it makes it much easier for users to kind of understand and to navigate crypto, as opposed to 2017, where the only thing in common between two dApps was the fact that they had tokens, but all the rest, all the rules behind were different.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions, but I was thinking about something. So we talked about standards, because I think maybe for us it's something very common because we work with that every day, but maybe for the audience it's not very clear. And there is an example that I like to give. So when thinking about standard, you can think about a USB or HDMI. This is a standard because like companies or manufacturers like just agreed on making, let's say, HDMI, and because this thing has been standardized, then you can connect your Nintendo Switch to your, let's say, Sony monitor or to your Dell laptop, or like, and I think this is a good example because it's real. So it's easy to see what the value is of having a standard. And actually, the same thing applies for smart contracts, because when we standardize things, we can all get along on a couple of things and say, oh, this little script, this smart contract needs to have that function, and this function, and this function. And when all those things have the same functions, the same names, the same inputs and outputs, then developers can build stuff that just work together. So, and this space is still very early, and there are lots of ways to standardize things. And this is something I think is really cool. Like, it's a really cool problem to tackle. I feel that in the field, a lot of people are building on existing standards, and less people are trying to work on the standard themselves. So I think it's really cool to work on that and to have like people and companies working on that. And I think in that field, and mainly in fashion, so digital fashion, I think we will need to have more standard at different levels. So we need to have it at the smart contract level for the identity, for the NFTs, but also for the 3D files, or how those things connect with the games or the metaverse world. And this is something we saw at DMAT when working with 3D designers. There was not really like standards. So some, especially when you try to like rig a model, how do you say, hey, this is a hand, this is the head, and those things. I think having more standard in that field will allow more interoperability between apps and games, websites, whatever. I don't know if
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, the real challenge is, or the real problem that standards address is the ability for users to port their data. So one metaphor, and I love the USB one. I use also the Blu-ray, which won against HD back in the day when we used to have physical DVDs. If you look at the problem of data portability, so you're on Facebook, you start interacting with people, you have friends, you have your family, you have your content, your data, and so on. And then you go to Instagram or to Twitter. You arrive on Twitter, and probably 70% overlap is there, like people that you know and so on are all there. But you have to start all over again. You have to find them, you have to follow them, you have to make sure they follow you back. So it's kind of the metaphor that I use for that. It's kind of, you are going on holiday, you are staying at a hotel, and all the things that you do while you are at that hotel belongs to the hotel. So if you go shopping, all your shopping bags have to stay in the hotel. If you make friends, you can only talk to them in that hotel. Or if you meet them in another place, you have to start all over again. So the idea of Web3, one of the core principles of Web3 platforms, is to enable people to port their data from one app to another. But the challenge is then that if you port your assets, like you own them, you own your private key. So it's a way to protect you from the app owning your assets, but you cannot guarantee that the next app will accept those assets. So today it's a defense mechanism, Web3 and all those like asset portability, private key, the decentralization of content basically is like a defense mechanism. But how do we do the I travel into this 3D experience or this social network or this platform, and all the assets that I have accumulated can follow me. So this works already with NFTs and tokens, but how can we expand that to more things?
Yeah, it's a good point, because so at Luxo, as I said earlier, we're working on identity, and the way we store, if you create an account, so we call them universal profiles. If you create one, let's say on DMAT, your data will be stored on the blockchain. in the smart contract in a standardized way. And then it means that whoever read the standard and see, oh, that's the username, it's stored here. That's the profile picture, it's stored here. And then you can build a website that will somehow connect to the same database, which is the blockchain, and just display that in the way you want. So even if you started your journey on Dematerialize, you can continue that journey on another app, because the underlying database has been standardized. And what we see today on a few like NFT marketplaces is that it's as simple as the name of the designer is not standardized. So this is like really Web 2. So if you go to whatever marketplace and you check the issuer, let's say the address is OX1 something, it will be very likely an EOA. So it means that the designer issued that NFT from a ledger or a MetaMask or whatever. And then where's the name of the designer coming from? Well, this name is stored in the marketplace database in a way that say, oh, address OX1 maps to name Hugo. But then if you're using the address OX1 on another marketplace, then you have to do it again. That's exactly what you say with this hotel thing. So, and we saw that there are lots of room here to grow and a lot of room to push those identities. And maybe at some point they will just not take over the EOA, but will be the main way to interact with the blockchain. Because it unlocks so much more potential, because you can attach a smart contract to your address and put information in it. You can delegate access. So let's say you're a brand, you connect your universal profile to a key manager and you can say, okay, maybe the marketing department has some access and they can do some things. Maybe the finance department, they have other access. So maybe they can withdraw the funds. But the marketing department can update the picture. And we can create those more complex use cases that we don't really know about yet. And yeah, I think it's super cool to see where this thing is going and to push that forward. So to, yeah, as you say, Sofiane, to go outside of the hotel and share the room. I wanted to know, so do you focus on fashion, or are there like some, because you mentioned DeFi, but are there like creative economies or like more, I don't know, art or fashion or things that you tackle, or at least you're like trying to push forward?
So we are specialized in one specific use case, which is social media. So we started with a social network called Newlife.io. And we are trying to standardize, basically to create a social graph that is a public good. So to kind of keep the concept of network effect, which I think we cannot escape from. Like you cannot compete with 2.0 giants if you don't have this network effect. But we have to make it owned by the users and not by a centralized platform. And so in order to achieve that, we are going to enable front-end developers basically to unbundle the UI from the backend. So the idea is that anyone can create an app that has the feature of a social network with their own view on the data.
Cool. Yeah, I'm really curious. I will check your docs and stuff and SDK after that. I wanted to speak about assets, because I think in the context of digital fashion, there's something really important, and that's something we had, like, not issues, but we had some challenges with that. So when we worked with brands, they were like making very high resolution 3D files and even like graphics, which of course doesn't fit so well with the web, because we have like live rendering and stuff. So I'm not a 3D designer, so my knowledge is a bit limited here. But I think that those standards will also move to the 3D space, and we already have like GLD, GLTX, which are like really good file format, but it's still, at least for what we did with DMAT, it still remain like quite wide and open. And I don't know if that's something, Sofiane, that you've been working on, or like you've been looking at, like more like the assets. How do you work with assets, and especially 3D files, or is it something that's a bit too far from what you're
This
doing?
is part of the topics that we kind of rely on others. We know that someone is going to sort this out. I think it's a very difficult problem to solve, and
Yeah.
as you mentioned, it's a bit far from. But yeah, I'm sure there are, as we speak, there are probably hundreds of great deep tech companies that are trying to solve that problem through machine learning, for example. So you upload your digital dress, into a server, and you request, all the game engines that you're interested in, all the environments, and it gives you the files for like the different
Yeah, I think
software.
I think that's something that will come for sure. And I'm also thinking about use cases. So, and that's something we put focus on at DMAT. It's like when you buy an NFT, you get utility out of it. So we have a couple of use cases, and depending on the drop, depending on the item, you get different use cases. So you can get lens, or you can get files, or you can get the physical item. And what's quite cool, I think, and that's what I mentioned at the beginning, is when we work with the brands, the fashion brands, they are like really creative people, and they have lots of ideas. Usually they will come to us and say, hey, is it possible to do this and that in the use case? And it was a bit interesting for us because we had to adapt the system at every drops, because there was a new use case that the brands wanted. So we wanted to issue a real garment. Can you make it work? Or we want to put that into that game. Can you make it work? So I still think that there are lots of innovation that can come out of it. And I said, like, drop after drop, they were like always super cool things. So you can get exclusive access to some VIP shops or events from brands. And I think this thing will merge into something that's also something that Luxo mentioned in the white paper a while ago, like all those social token. How, if you own NFTs from a brand, how does that thing gives you access to upcoming drops or events? And I'm also looking forward for that, and think with like, yeah, I'm opening a lot of doors here. So tell me, Sofiane, if I'm getting a
Yeah, I
bit.
think that
I,
a lot of people are touching on the question of how far can we tokenize, and what's the ultimate form of tokenization. And I think that the personal token or social token, or we give it a lot of different names, but this idea that each person can have a clout that is not based on the amount of followers, but rather on the demand for their fungible asset, I think that's definitely inevitable. Because if you look at how the VC space, for example, has progressively gone from we're gonna invest in Series D to now you have like pre-seed and angel groups and people trying to find yield by going to the earlier stage. The early stage, the ultimate early stage is for people to invest in each other on a peer-to-peer basis, and the level of expertise, like nobody knows better or nobody can predict better the future success of a creator than their fans. And so if you are the fan of someone, you are very, very niche, and you can actually participate in it. So it's not just like speculating and investing, but it's kind of a hybrid between being a client, being a fan, being an angel investor, something like that, at the intersection of all of that.
Yeah, I
And
think
so,
this. Yeah. Sorry,
yeah, I just think that it's inevitable. Like it's the natural progression that once everything is overpriced, all the stock market is overpriced, all the products, goods, and so on, the main form of investment will be interpersonal. It won't be equity anymore, but it will be, I like the way you think. I believe in you. Here is a few tokens, and I want to buy your tokens in exchange because I think they are more valuable than those guys over there. I think that's the future.
Yeah, tokens everywhere. I think it makes me think about it's something like digital twins. So because the topic is platform 3.0, so I'm trying to stick to this, even though that's quite wide, but that's on purpose, I guess. But I think digital twins is something that's interesting. So let's say you buy a very high-end bag, and this bag has a chip. And along this bag, there is this digital twin, so the token of this bag. And whenever you get this bag or this garment, you claim the token. And what I think is super cool is, so what we see today with digital art, when you buy, or like just like NFTs, when you buy something from like second market, there is a way to give fees to the creators, like 2% or 3% for every resale. And if that thing can be done also for physical things, I think it's a crazy thing for the brands because they sell you a bag, and then when you sell it like secondhand, maybe you will sell the token, and through the sale, the creator will get its shares, its cut. So I think this is really nice, and also with the access, because maybe you have a lot of items from a brand, but you bought everything secondhand. And so the brand does not see you, they have no clue who you are. And if all those secondhand sales, you have those NFTs in your wallet, then the brand know that this wallet is someone that likes their brand. And it can help to create a community. And I think lots of use cases will come from those digital twin. Is it something that you have in your scope, or not much, or like what are your thoughts on this?
I think that the big picture here is that if you look at the evolution, you have, I made a prediction, I think it was 5 years ago, that at some point in our lifetime, you will go to a club and you will have more DJs than people on the dance floor. And we could also imagine a future where DJ would pay to have an audience. So everyone wants to create. You used to have, one photographer for 10,000 people. Then it became 100 photographers for 10,000 people. Now you have maybe 8,000 photographers for 10,000 people. Everyone is playing with their iPhones and posting the best shot they can on Instagram and so on. So this is obvious that everyone now wants to do music and photography and so on. So the question is, how do we handle that? Do we create some AI NPCs to listen to you, or the fact that people are buying followers, for example, on social media is a great symptom, let's say, of this situation. So when you look at physical products like fashion, the challenge is that to achieve that goal that everyone can be a fashion designer, you would have to overproduce, and it would be a disaster. It's already kind of stuff on the planet. I think fashion is probably the number one or number two most polluting activity or industrial activity. So I think the ability to make fashion look more like the music industry, where you can like split, you can compose, let's say, licensing and say, okay, there are 1,000 people who contributed to that design, for example, through a DAO, and they will share some royalties when the garment is sold, and all the interplay of these kind of models, I think, is not only necessary. I think it's going to happen again. It's one of those things that are inevitable. That people won't bother, especially with the improvement of 3D and all of that. So if we look like 15, 20 years from now, the digital life and the digitalized fashion economy, I think, will be much bigger than the physical one.
Yeah, that's for sure, I guess. Yeah, I was thinking when you were speaking that I think like platform 3.0, because when we think about platform, I think about Uber or Amazon, like very centralized stuff. And if we add 3.0 at the end, we've tried to make it like more decentralized. At the end, do we still have a platform, or the platform is just the blockchain itself? And then I think maybe in that context, just every agent has the ability to just get the data it needs to build something. So maybe I think at the end there's no platform at all, just like peer-to-peer interaction through some smart contracts and some rules. And I think this could also apply to, because we talked a lot about fashion and digital art with NFTs, but I think this can also apply to real estate, and we're already seeing DAOs or like companies doing that, or maybe cars. And what if when you buy a car or when you buy a house, you just exchange a token and it just pays for the tax and to do everything that is being done by hand today. I don't know to what extent this token will go into our life, but I think it starts with art, and then it might grow into, let's say, less creative or less artistic parts of our lives.
I think that if you look at the definition of creator, again, it's like it started with one Michael Jackson, one Madonna, and billions of fans, and with the evolution of subcultures and all those like ramifications of like subgenres in music and so on, you end up with basically smaller and smaller and smaller fractions, let's say, of the audience, and an audience that is increasingly participative in the process, and an audience that wants to basically contribute to the creative process. And so I think that we talk a lot about UBI as like a solution to solve the automation in the future. I think that the platform 3.0, or what we call social 3.0 with Newcoin, is this idea that you can stretch the definition of creator, you can lower the bar, let's say, and that's something that also I think is a result of Web 2, where obviously if you are not redistributing anything to creators, of course you better make sure that you minimize the value of what they produce. So you kind of call this like a post. It's a post. It's you try to reduce to as little as possible. You don't show the data, you don't show the advertisers, you don't show the market shares. Just to make sure that all the people who work every day on those platforms and who contribute every day their talent, their creativity, their love, their care, their family pictures, their talent, their ideas, their all of that, you try to minimize it as much as possible, and also you design algorithms and interfaces that are more designed for attention, things like TikTok, for example, or the Reels now on Instagram. and you try to push behavior towards, let's maximize the screen time as opposed to let's maximize the creative value and the impact of the content. So what it means for platform 3.0, I think, is this idea that if everyone is recognized as a creator, and if we lower the bar of what it means to be a creator, so for example, things like the first fans or the curators, or there are a lot of areas of creativity that are, again, either minimized or completely forgotten or ignored. But I do believe that when someone is, for one creator who's successful, you have an entire community that has contributed. And I think that the early movers should be rewarded because they are part of the process. So instead of giving people like a charity called UBI, I'm much more into things like UCI, where you add a layer of reciprocation on top of the internet, where each time you interact with creativity and you add value to this pool of intellectual property, you increase your position in the ownership of the whole, and you can have governance rights, and you can have all those things that are no longer charity, but that are just the fair recognition of the value that was produced.
Yeah, I was thinking, I think this topic we didn't talk about yet, but I think with this like platform 3.0 or Web3, there's a lot of things related to, let's say, education and learning. And we know that today it's a technology that's a bit hard to grasp. And I think it's also one challenge for the companies is to build a product that is easy to use, or easy to get started with. So because, and that's something we're trying to do at Luxo and at DMAT, is that you are interacting with blockchain without really seeing it. You will see your universal profile without you don't need to have like strong skills and like solidity, and it just work. And how do you, in your products, and when you address communities, how do you try to address this education thing, like so your community can be as wide as possible, and you don't end up with only let's say technical people, or people with already a strong, let's say, blockchain knowledge or tokenomics knowledge or that kind of things?
Yeah, so I think that for creators, the process should be progressive. So we have the progressive web app in the mobile domain. Actually, this part of mobile is also very interesting for Web3 because it enables like much more native things on mobile, and that's something we are looking into very seriously currently, especially now that Apple is more open to it. So in the same way that you can progressively onboard people from the web to a native app, you can also progressively onboard them to Web3. And so I think that it comes down to, at the beginning, there is nothing to lose. So you have no assets, or so you can just like onboard in a more traditional way, easy. And then over time, you give custody, basically. You teach the users that, you kind of have some assets now, and if you want to get access to them, you need to gain custody of your keys. And mechanisms like that, I think that it's not like one size fits all. I think the ecosystem will find very broad diversity and broad range of solutions to that problem.
Yeah, with the custody, I agree. And I think a good way to help adoption is just to deal with the gas fees and that kind of stuff for the early users or like newcomers. Because if your UX is like, hey, you want to buy an NFT? Okay, go to Coinbase, do a KYC, send a wire transfer, buy some tokens, and then send it to your MetaMask, write your seed word, at the end of the day, like your user will be lost and they don't want to interact with your product. But if on the other hand, you say, hey, look, just put your email, we'll deploy your account for you, we'll pay for the fees for you, and we will execute the transaction on your behalf. That's something we do at Luxo. And to do that, we use a standard called ESC75, and more specifically ESC75X, which allows someone to execute a transaction for you. So that someone can be a company with maybe its own business model. They say, okay, we'll pay for your fees, for your transaction, but you can start doing stuff on the blockchain and you don't have to worry about having tokens in your MetaMask or whatever account. And I think that we see some companies doing that, like just handling that for you, for the users. But I think we should see more. And I think it's still a big stop for non-technical people that getting into blockchain. It's scary. You need to send euros or dollars somewhere. And I think this goes into education as well. But those are, I think, important topics for Platform 3.0, I think.
Yeah, I think that, you know, what I find very awkward with Web3 is that we are displaying a lot of things that are not supposed to be, you know, the problem of the creators or the users or the communities. They should not, like, when you use a website, you should not learn what it means to be in HTTPS or, you know, all those like POP3 and so on. Like, that was the beginning of the internet. I remember I had to like configure my email, so I had to put some like SMTP address and then some POP3 and so on. And now you have Gmail, and so you just like, you know, bound your Gmail account to whatever software, and it's all fully automated. I think we are getting there. I think it's going to take time, but this fetishization of like, oh yeah, this thing is an NFT and I'm an NFT artist, like this makes no sense to me. Like in the long term, I think that NFT will be just a little checkbox that you tick, you know, when you upload a picture, but it shouldn't be like you know, putting NFT, like things like, you know, Nifty Getaway or like, you know, all those names that contain like, you know, kind of play with NFTs. I think it's for now, yeah, it's because we are in this like, you know, massive excitement, but I think that in the future it will be like, yeah, it will be more in the background.
Yeah, I fully agree. I was thinking, I met someone who said that NFT was a terrible word, and instead of calling them non-fungible token, we should call them DOT for digitally owned things, which I thought was a fun thing. It makes it slightly less technical, but yeah, this.
Yeah, I think digital assets, I think is fine.
Yeah. Cool. I see it's like 10:52. I don't know time-wise. Maybe, yeah, like, I have a couple of questions or, yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in and say it's been a really interesting conversation. I do want to open it up and take questions from the audience, but before we do that, I was hoping that each of you could give advice on how to invest, and I hate to use these words, but this is what folks will commonly hear. How do I invest in an NFT project? How do I know? And the follow-up question is, how do I know that this platform is legit? With all the scamming that's happening, a lot of folks are curious. So first, each of you answer, how would you advise that folks, like your grandma, for example, if she says, baby, I've seen all of these projects out there. What about World of Women? What about the apes? Like, who's the best project to invest in, baby? So, what would you advise your grandmother on how to start investing in NFT projects?
Yeah, that's a cool question. So, so we talk about NFT projects, right? Not NFT platforms. I think because platforms more like, I don't know, OpenSea, Super, but more for the project. Something I look at personally is like, who's the team behind? And I'm not like, when the team is a bunch of like random anonymous like Twitter people, it just makes me less comfortable because I don't know who are those people. And when the project is backed by real companies, real people, like for instance, if we take Artifact, like we know who is behind Artifact, right? And it just gives me more confidence into the project. And sometimes you see projects, they just you have no clue who's behind that. And another thing is, if you go into the Discord and if you find them quite aggressive, oh, you're not part of the team. And I had that when I was looking at the project. I went into the Discord and say, hey, you kept the React, like create React app in the title, which was just a suggestion. And they were like, yeah, we're busy. It's not important. Like, they were really aggressive. This is not a project I want to invest in. And maybe last thing is just something that speaks to you. If it's art, I mean, if you find it, if it gives you emotions, if you find it nice, I mean, that's I guess same for art, right? Like, why would you buy this painting and not this one? I guess the first thing is like, do you like it? But I'm not an NFT expert, so I won't I won't say much about that. But I hope that might help your grandma, maybe. Sofiane, it's your turn.
It's your
Yeah.
grandmother, Hugo. Your grandmother is asking. You got to make it personal so that the advice you give can be the very best advice. My grandma is cool. She's got NFTs, right? But your grandmother, how would you advise her? Sofiane, same question. Or your grandfather, right? How would you advise your grandparents on investing in current NFT projects that are out there?
Yeah, so I think that the NFT, it's very interesting actually how the value of NFTs, and it took me a lot of time to understand that, how the consensus is reached over the value of NFTs. So usually you have, let's say, someone who's trusted, let's say, so a gallery curator, people from the art world and so on, who are professional and who tell something is valuable. In the NFT space, the value is defined by the other NFTs. So there is no person or entity that will tell you, okay, this thing has value, but it's more, there is a collection, there are like, I don't know, 300 or 3,000 items in it. And you look at the price of all of them, and you look at the evolution of the price, you look at who owns them, because the reputation of people who bought them is also. So it's like a peer-to-peer, collector-to-collector reputation mechanism, where there needs to be a consistency within the collection, because if you cannot recognize that item number 1 is part of the same collection as item number 10, then you kind of lose that sense of like cohesion, consistency within the collection. So then it's about, okay, there was a first drop of like 10 items, and then 10 more are coming, and over time, basically the collection builds up. And if you are at the right place at the right time, you might be taking part in a collection that will definitely grow in value, and that will continuously grow, versus things that are more like rug pulls, where they just try to pump the price for like hype the price to give people. And usually I think it comes down to like culture versus greed. If it feels that it's all about price and it's all about greed and it's all about, oh, come to the whitelist and then you will get a special price and then blah blah blah, like this is not really a good indicator. On the other side, if you feel that people are excited about it can be just as stupid as like a fun meme, like the Bored Apes, for example. It's like, it's not something very deep in terms of culture, but still it has like something that people interact with emotionally and culturally. And so, yeah, if you see that there is a strong investment and community around the culture of the collection, and at the same time a consistency between the different elements of the collection, and the owners of the first items are people who are pretty good at forming community and at identifying good. Yeah, and then I would say the last one is you need to like the thing, because at least even if the price goes to zero, you can still enjoy being the owner of that piece of art.
Thank you very much for those insights. Now we'll open it up to people in the audience. If you have a question for our panelists, do raise your hand and we will bring you forward. Wow, looks like we are here with all experts. No one has a question. Any feedback? You don't necessarily have to have a question. Any feedback for us would also be welcomed. Okay, well, no feedback either. Thank you all so much for joining us. This has been a fantastic conversation. These recordings will be live on our YouTube channel in just a few hours. So if you'd like to go back, you were too shy to ask a question here in the live chat, you can go back and listen to it on our YouTube, which is Universe Contemporary. At youtube.com and formulate your questions and get more knowledge there. You guys are awesome. I love this conversation and I think we can easily have a part 2. So yeah, maybe I'll formulate that and plan that. I loved your questions to Sofiane, Hugo. I'd be interested for Sofiane to learn a bit more about what you guys are up to at DMAT. And then maybe in our next conversation, he will address a bunch of questions toward you. You're both working on such amazing projects, but addressing innovation in Web3 from different angles. And we need all brains, all hearts, all perspectives, especially the perspectives that will advance the space and move humanity forward in the right directions. This has been a really great conversation. We'll see you tomorrow for Crypto Fashion Week Talks 2022. Thanks, guys.
Cool.
Thank you so much, everyone. Great to meet you,
everyone, for your
Hugo.
time.
Thank you, Lady PheOnix.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.